Well, hello and welcome everybody once again, and we are back with the F1 show here on Motorsport Radio. My name is Ross McIntyre. Joining me as always is the wonderful Connor Jackson. How are you doing, Connor?
I'm very good, Ross. How are you? It's a pleasure to be back here, and of course we are in for the final leg of the season, the final double header as it were, and of course new circuit, Saudi Arabia. I'm looking forward to it later on.
Well, it's all going to have to be discussed later tonight and what's going to happen. And making his triumphant return, it's the man, the myth, the legend. That is Josh Harrison. Josh, it's great to have you back. How you doing, mate?
Oh, it's great to be back. As I said, I've had a couple of weeks off and it's all built up inside me and it's all going to explode today.
Oh, I can only wait and see what happens. So, of course, welcome along this week here for the Saudi Arabian. I think it's the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix preview. I don't know if it's the Jeddah Grand Prix or something like that. They've been naming all the Grand Prix weird recently, but it's the one that's this weekend, and we're previewing it. You know how it runs. Cars go around a track. Championship stuff happens. Should be interesting. Hamilton versus Verstappen, all of that upcoming. However, unfortunately tonight we are going to have to start on a rather somber note after the news was brought forward on Sunday that the legendary team owner Frank Williams had passed away at the age of 79. Frank Williams, of course, founded Frank Williams Racing Cars back in the 60s, and then Williams Grand Prix Engineering, now commonly known as Williams, still running, although not under the Williams family anymore. Going on to win the Constructors' title in 1980, 81, 86, 87, 92, 93, 94, 96 and 97. They were winning Drivers' Championships within 3 years of their conception, and they were one of the most, they still are one of the most successful teams on the Formula One paddocks. And Frank was one of the most renowned men in the Formula One paddock. And, especially considering that he was left quadriplegic after a horrific car accident as well. So to have his team run that successfully was phenomenal. And of course, it is, he will be terribly missed. And it's a damn shame that he has passed away. But I thought we'd open, discussing some of our favourite Williams memories, some of our favourite Frank Williams memories after what a legendary man and a legendary team. And, after the news. And of course, I'm sure that he will be continued to be remembered across the rest of the year. But it's time for our little tribute. So, Connor, we'll start with you. You're always the knowledgeable one on the history of the sport. Why don't you give us some of your favourite Frank memories, some of your favourite Williams memories from a trip down memory lane?
Oh, indeed. As I'm sure many of you can see by my face, I was not around during the glory days of the Williams team in the 80s and 90s, despite what I'm sure some of you in the comments are making snide remarks about right now. But obviously that doesn't mean I can't relive the memories, as it were, for a time I never lived through. And yeah, there's so many good examples of how the Williams team shone throughout that era. I, of course, remember some of the rivalries between their drivers when they were the dominant force in Formula One. We're thinking, Piquet and Mansell in sort of 86. We're thinking, Mansell's domination himself in 92 and Hill and Villeneuve in, 96, for example. Williams throughout the era have been groundbreaking when it comes to challenging the establishment of Formula One. When you think of the big teams, you think of Ferrari, McLaren, Williams, and of those three, Williams is very much the family organization. It's very much the independent constructor who was valiant in remaining loyal to the constructor term. Even if we think more recently in their history, they were determined, up until shortly before Frank left the team, that they would continue to engineer all of their parts in-house through their, Williams engineering arm, rather than, outsource it to the larger manufacturers, which some of the other constructors have been doing, because they wanted to be loyal to that name, constructor, that they were there building the cars themselves, not just factory parts outbuying. And it's that sort of determination throughout their history that has seen them not just become a successful Formula One team, but one where talent on track and off track can thrive. And so I've really been impressed, obviously, with how Frank has led that organization throughout the years. And yeah, of course, just the legacy he's built. And of course, we think of all the great engineering talent that came out of that team, Patrick Head, Adrian Newey, people who defined the sport in future years. So it would be a shame for us not to take a moment to reflect upon his life and his legacy that team has done. I'm sure plenty of us have heard the stories in the news in the last couple weeks. Reliving memories from his family or whatever. And the one that particularly stuck in my mind was when he was in the period between owning race teams, as it were, where his wife sent him out for fish and chips, and he came back with a spark plug instead because he was just that determined to sort of keep that racing connection, as it were. And so, yeah, it's fantastic to look back at his legacy, and we can only share thoughts with his family at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much, I feel, a death that has affected everybody involved and interested with Formula One. Frank was just such an influential man. I mean, Josh Coteau as well, not just influential in Formula One, but over in British touring cars as well, of course. The Williams had a very successful BTCC mark for several years. He was a man that, I think the way I was described was a bit Marmite from reports in person. He was a person who either very much loved or hated in person. But, from a fan perspective looking in, he was, I think, a man that everyone looked at just with such awe. You think of the drivers who drove in his cars. You've got Mansell, you've got Senna, Piquet, Prost, all these huge names in their cars. And I think, when you look back, in recent years, Williams, it's been a bit of a bumpy ride. The last win they had was back in 2012 with Pastor Maldonado, which is a long time ago. Even then, he was, although he'd handed on most of his duties over to his daughter Claire, who was deputy team principal, he was still, the team owner and team principal until 2019, when the team was taken over by current owners Dorilton Capital. As you said, they've sworn to stick by the philosophy of building everything in-house, sticking with that Williams name. They want to keep the DNA of this team alive. They are very much believers of keeping the philosophy of Williams engineering. Again, you just, as I said, you think of the names who drove in those Williams cars. You think of Senna. The word on the street was that that Frank was just so delighted when Senna came on board in 1994. He tried to get him a few seasons earlier. I think he tried to get him in 93, and it almost did work out. He finally gets him on board, and obviously, unfortunately, Ayrton Senna was killed a few races into his Williams career, and apparently Frank was just absolutely heartbroken because he was a driver that he adored, a driver that he admired. And you think of all the drivers across the sport who've spent time with Williams, but when they've been in the good times or the bad times at Williams, and just every single one of them have, even if they have enjoyed their time or haven't enjoyed their time, they have said it's just been such a pivotal and influential moment in their Formula One career. I mean, one kind of time period that sticks in my mind for Williams is the early 2000s, when they had those BMW rocket ships in the back of the car. Thinking 2003, you've got Michael Schumacher versus Kimi Räikkönen versus Juan Pablo Montoya for the title. 2004, I believe they had the highest revving Formula One engine of all time, or the highest revving V10 ever, or something in the back of that car, and went up to like 20,000 revs per minute, which was just ridiculous. And obviously Montoya held the fastest lap in Formula One history for a long old time until 2018, 2019, something like that, with his qualifying effort at Monza. And you think of just these iconic moments for Williams. You think of Hill versus Villeneuve in 1996. You think of the dominance of the FW14B cars with its active suspension. That Frank Williams, Adrian Newey, and Patrick Head dream team that was heading up at that point. And Nigel Mansell finally getting his championship with them after he was robbed so many years earlier. It's a team steeped in history, and all of that history is traced back to Frank. And what a character he was. And I mean, Josh as well. I mentioned earlier that he had a BTCC team as well. I mean, we're not going to talk about that because this is the F1 show. There's a time and a place. But he did so much across his career as well. It was just simply phenomenal.
Well, yeah, as he said, with the British touring cars, it was the fact that someone turned up with pretty much very little backing and able to not just run a touring car team, but win it in arguably one of the most competitive eras of touring cars. He gave birth, I feel, to Jason Plato, one of the greatest saloon car drivers of all time. Started in Williams, but going back to Formula One, I was a couple of months ago. I went to Hayes Motor Museum down in Yeovil, and they've got a room with some of the most iconic Formula One Williams cars. You just walk around them and you just can't help but just, your jaw just hits the ground. They look absolutely beautiful. And when I heard the news, it actually it made my heart stop a bit, because it was like I'd only just left going around that room looking at those cars up close, like you said, with that BMW Williams, and seeing it up close, it's just magnificent. They got everything right. It's how what is basically a little team, a tiny team based in England, has done so well, and it's all down to this gentleman, this bloke who I think defied people's belief time and time again. And I reckon you could speak to anyone on the grid this weekend and they would all have a story about Sir Frank Williams, regardless of whether they drove for Williams, whether they worked for Williams, whether they might never have been in Williams, but he was there on the grid time and time again, in his wheelchair, in his purple jumper. I always remember him sitting in the back of the garage watching the Formula One, cheering every overtake as if he was racing it himself. And even then, we're talking 70s, he still had that same love for a car. And I think these days, and the Formula One as it is now, where it's so dictated by money, it was just nice to see someone who didn't care about the money aspect. He wanted the car. He worked for the car. He built the car. He didn't care about making money out of a team. It was all about the car. I think that's what's now missing from Formula One with his passing.
Yeah, you could very much tell that Frank was a man who just absolutely lived and breathed racing. As you said, even after his terrible injury, most people would have been consigned to a bed for the rest of their life. Frank, is able to keep turning up to Formula One races, is still runs the team, and essentially is running the team, and even as he gets later into his life, is still technically the head and the owner of Williams Grand Prix Engineering, and just as you said, he's just, everyone would have a story to tell, and I'm sure that everyone will be, as you said, have something to say about Frank, and I'm sure that this weekend we'll be getting hundreds of messages from all of those involved in Formula One, telling us stories about this and that. And, it's going to be stories that I think we're all going to enjoy, because he was just such an amazing guy. He was just an amazing bloke. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. As you said, it is a case of trying to move on now. Obviously, what Josh said about, a team owner that loved his racing, and it really is a shame to see someone like that go, because we do see a lot of the teams now, they're all owned by, investment companies, a lot of the teams, Williams, sadly now no exception. It's a shame that we're losing these, real gentlemen of the sport, as it were. Just a quick reference on the BMW mark. I remember Frank basically rejected a BMW takeover in the mid 2000s when they wanted to completely take control of the team, and Frank, he rejected the idea, not because he wasn't interested, let's say, but because he wouldn't have control otherwise. He wouldn't have control over his baby, and it was that sort of rejecting the money, as it were, that really stood him out as a team owner. BMW went off and did their own thing with Sauber, obviously the following couple of years. But that partnership, I think, cemented Frank as being really dedicated to the sport, because at that time in his life, he could easily have stepped back and gone, right, look, I've had my time, I've had my tenure, good luck. But he didn't. He stayed strong to his guns and strong to his independence, and that, I think, will be remembered.
It's not just that. I mean, it's been announced as well that Williams will be making the battery packs for the entire Formula E grid in 2022. So his legacy lives on in Formula E, which is the futuristic motorsport, the futuristic Formula One. So, even after his passing...
Slightly controversial statement there, but carry on.
Yeah, but even after his passing, Williams is still going on. And I don't know whether this deal was done before he passed or after he passed, but it would be nice to see next year that every car racing will have a bit of Frank Williams inside it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, of course, if anyone at home has any, special memories of Frank, any interaction they may have had with him, or just a story they'd like to share, please do not be afraid to get in touch with us over at Motorsport Radio on all good social medias. We would love to hear your stories about Frank, your tributes about Frank. So please get in touch with us. But it is time to move on now to the main topic of discussion today, and that is the preview of the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. I think it's safe to say one of the most controversial Grand Prix ever, and it's not even happened yet. So let's just get into business, of course. It's the penultimate round of the season. The championship fight is closer than it has ever been between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. The track wasn't finished until a few days ago. It's ridiculously fast. The walls are ridiculously close. Let's discuss, boys. You know what? Let's start off with the the interesting bit. I know Josh will have something to get off his chest about the championship fight. He's not been here for a while. He's probably got some pent up rage against the Dutchman that is Max Verstappen deep within inside. So, Josh, we'll go to you first. Verstappen versus Hamilton. There's 8 points in it at the moment in Verstappen's favour. Supposedly, Mercedes are coming in and putting the engine that Hamilton had in Brazil back in Hamilton's car for this weekend. Should this be a weekend where Hamilton firmly takes the momentum into the final round into Abu Dhabi?
I'd like to say yes, but the realistic thing is you generally don't know. Everyone is on a blank slate now. No one has any advantage whatsoever. They're working on what is effectively sims of that track, using not previous knowledge of the track. They're actually probably using dimensions that they've got from the track, because no one's seen the track yet. Drivers
it didn't exist until like 2 days ago, as
exactly.
Ross was saying.
There'll be drivers get into the circuit tomorrow, and then on Thursday. Generally, that will be the first time anyone has ever seen that circuit, right? So to say Lewis has an advantage is probably yes, in a way, yes, because he's got the momentum, yes. But we're talking about a circuit that's incredibly high speed, potentially very dangerous, and no one has ever driven it before. It's going to be dirty. It's going to be dusty. There's going to be some sort of issues because it's a brand new track. It's not going to work brilliantly first time. Remember Bahrain when that was first used? How dusty that track got. And it was, it's the same thing. And Saudi Arabia, obviously, we know it's a bit controversial in the actual country. But just from the racing aspect, this will be I think this could actually decide the championship, this race.
So, there's only one way when you say decide the championship, it can be decided, unless you're incredibly speaking metaphorically here.
Well, I could see either Hamilton or Verstappen not finishing the race. But only one of them not finishing the race. So if obviously Hamilton wins and Verstappen doesn't finish, that's 26 points Hamilton's gaining on Verstappen. And then you think the last race into it, do you think Verstappen could then gain that 20 point back?
Well, it's not up till the fat lady sings.
And then on the other side, if Hamilton crashes out or doesn't finish in points and Verstappen wins, championship over.
True. Josh, I sort of want to slightly turn it on its head. So I want to ask you a question. In that there was a lot of talk, do you remember, back in 2016 when Rosberg won the title, that Hamilton was unlucky that year, and it was largely down to the fact that Hamilton had that big engine failure in Malaysia. And, as a result, he had one more retirement than Rosberg. And so, that was the only reason, he lost the title that year because, of that massive engine failure. Well, as we stand with 2 races to go, there are 2 races in which Verstappen failed to score, and there are 3 races in which Hamilton has failed to score. So if Verstappen loses out on the title by a few points, can we call the 2016 argument back into effect and go, well, he would have won the title anyway if it had been the other way around? Also, sorry, Verstappen 3 retirements, Hamilton 2. My apologies. On
basic paper, yes, because obviously 3 retirements compared to 2, you're going to gain points. If you've had less retirements, you're going to gain points, obviously. But I disagree with that argument 2016. I would happily put my hands up and say Rosberg was the better driver. Rosberg was the most consistent. Rosberg arguably showed the more experience, I'd like to say, than Hamilton on that year. Yes, Hamilton had the blowout in Malaysia, but don't matter. That generally doesn't matter because that's only one race. You know, we're talking a 22 race season and one race. You lost the championship with it. No, you lost the championship because of other races where you didn't pick up the points. You didn't get the pit stops right. You didn't overtake when you needed to overtake. You maybe lost your front wing in an incident that you didn't need to lose your front wing on. You went for an overtake you didn't need to go for. This is what the championship's all about. This year, it's exactly the same thing. If Verstappen wins, it will immediately go back and say, well, hang on a minute, you know, Hamilton was wrong because of that incident in Silverstone, the incident in Monza, you know, it'll be all this. But at the end of the day, Verstappen if he wins the championship, you have to say that he was the better driver. He was the most consistent. Maybe you could come into the fact that Red Bull's got the better car, but
I mean, I'm going to hold you to this, Josh. At the end of the season, of Verstappen deserve the title if he gets more points, because I'm sure that's going to come back to bite no one at any point.
It probably will do, but we're working on the fact that Verstappen will win this, and he won't. You know, Hamilton will win this. We know Hamilton will win this.
Tune in 2 weeks' time for our Formula One season review here on Motorsport Radio.
Because if you remember 2008, the gap between Hamilton and Massa on the last race was
not enough.
So, you know, you think of it, it's that sort of championship. Hamilton was behind for a lot of the season. He won the championship. This time, he's been behind a lot of the season. He's sneaking up on Verstappen. He's putting the pressure on Hamilton and on Verstappen, and Verstappen is buckling. Even Horner is buckling. You know, that shows you how much pressure there is on them.
Yeah, but would you say the last couple of races at least, Red Bull have had the best car?
Red Bull's had the best car the whole season. Makes no difference.
I disagree with that one. I would disagree with that one. I also disagree with the Horner and Verstappen buckling. But
don't you remember the Bahrain pre-season test where the Mercedes was, I quote, undrivable?
Yeah, and then I remember how they came back and
perfect.
Do you remember in 2017 and 2018 when Ferrari were up the road in pre-season testing and then Mercedes proceeded to absolutely destroy them in both years?
Yeah, but that's the Italian way of doing things. That's the Italian way of doing things. That's them looking, we've done that job for the year, done.
True. I mean, it's an interesting debate, to be fair. I mean, I actually, in regards to what you said, you know, with Rosberg winning the 2016 title, I very much agree with you. I think Rosberg would have won that title anyway. I think as well, actually, in 2014, I think Hamilton was the better driver in 2014, but I think if Rosberg hadn't had the gearbox failure at Singapore, I think he would have won that title, actually. Because Hamilton had a lot of reliability early in the season. He just basically led the entire championship up to that point, and just got hit with bad reliability at a bad time. So I do think Hamilton was the better driver out of the pair of them that season. I just think if that hadn't happened, he would have won the title. It's an interesting debate moving forward. I mean, again, as you said, Josh, it's a totally clean slate coming to Jeddah. No one knows what's going to happen. And you know, even in regard of this season's been a bit of a shake-up. You know, we've had cars dominating at tracks where we wouldn't expect them to. This is brand new, and it's fast. It's very fast. The walls are very close, and it looks like it's going to be very, very tricky to race up the cars around here. It's going to be very hard to follow, very hard to overtake. It's a super flow circuit. Looks fantastic to drive, don't get me wrong, but just doesn't look fun to try and follow. And if you make a mistake, it's going to be like Monaco, except at 200 miles an hour instead of 120. It's going to be a very, very big hit with a wall. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, what strategies the teams are employing, because it could be, you know, do we go all out aggression here and, you know, trying to take momentum into the final round in Abu Dhabi, but then also risk utterly destroying the car and losing any progress that we had? I think Mercedes definitely have more to lose here as well, because obviously they're the chasing pack. If Hamilton crashes out here, or makes a mistake or gets held up or something by a safety car, because let's be honest here, looking at the track, there will be safety cars. There will possibly be a red flag. I can guarantee you in F2 there will be a red flag, knowing how that's gone this season. I think in F2 there's been like a safety car every race or something stupid, if my memory serves correct, or there was up to Silverstone anyway. I know that was true at the halfway point of the season. All it takes for a perfect time safety car, virtual safety car, red flags come out, and you're in the bin. Your strategy's in the bin. Your race is in the bin. And Mercedes 100% have more to lose here. They're coming in with the guns blazing with the new engine in the back of Hamilton's car. They're coming in pushing. If Hamilton scores nothing and Verstappen wins this race, championship's over. Verstappen wins. He's 8 points clear at the moment. So Mercedes can come away with this weekend. If we're going to presume it's a 1-2 finish in Hamilton's favour, Verstappen still leads the championship by 1 point heading into Abu Dhabi. They're the team, and Lewis Hamilton is the driver with the most to lose coming into this weekend. On one hand, that means they'll be probably more likely to push more, which is, come in with the expectation, we've got nothing to lose, let's just go for it and see what happens. But on the other side, Mercedes, do they want to take that risk? We've been seeing this year, I know you said that Verstappen and Horner have been buckling under pressure. That's true. There've definitely been moments where Horner and Verstappen and Red Bull as a whole have looked like they've just not been quite able to handle the pressure. They haven't been in the champion fight for a long time, so I'd expect that. There has also definitely been times where Mercedes have also been, in my opinion, struggling under the pressure. And what are they going to do? If they destroy the car, what are they going to do coming into Jeddah? And as you said, Josh, as well, repeating myself here, but it's going to be dusty. The teams don't know what's going to happen. So really, it's all up in the air, and we have no idea what's going to happen.
I mean, the interesting thing as well, not only is the dust and all that to be considered with, but don't forget, this will be run at night when the track will be cooling down every lap. The track will get colder, the track will get slippier. And also at night, no matter how good the lights will be, there will be shadows, which means parts of the track will be better lit than others. So you've got all of this to contend with as well. You've got, what setup will they go for? Because, yes, it's fast, but there's not that many straights. There's a lot of corners. So you need a lot of downforce. But downforce slows you down, right? And, yes, it looks like it's going to be a very hard track to overtake on. So do you go for a high downforce setup like Azerbaijan sort of thing, where you struggle on the straights, but you can get around the corners and therefore keep off the barriers? Or do you go for a very low downforce setup and hopefully you've got enough speed going through those fast corners that you don't just lose the back end with the low grip? That's the thing that the teams will have to work out on the 3 practice sessions. So just remember, the teams have got 3 hours to go from having absolutely no idea what setup to put on to turning up at qualifying where the setup has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect at qualifying, they're going to have an awful weekend.
I think the fact you made there with the dust is the most important point, which is if you're deciding whether to do low or high downforce, as it were, and you've seen that track, it's going to clear up a bit over the weekend, don't get me wrong, but there's surely not enough grip around that track. It's not rubbing enough for you to risk a proper low downforce setup. I'm sure most teams would do a high downforce setup. The other thing you mentioned, overtaking. Absolutely. I'm going to call it now. This is going to be a one-stop race, assuming there's no red flags or something. And throws it up. But assuming the race is run relatively normal, one stop, because track position is going to be so key here to the extent, and you can't follow through any of those straighty corner things, because if any of you look at the track map at the back part of the track, it's fast. You're not going to be breaking through those corners, but you're also no way going to be overtaking or going side by side in any way, shape or form. Following a car through those corners is going to be madness. The only place you're really going to be overtaking on this circuit is turn 1. And all you need to do is save up your battery, as Lewis and Max have both done at various points throughout the season. Save up your battery all the way around the circuit and just apply all of it down the front straight and just hope that's enough to beat the DRS. And that's all you need to do. because the rest of it, there's just no way to overtake. I know they're going to put a DRS zone along the back, sort of, I think it's like turn 10 to turn 15 or whatever it is, which is ridiculous, by the way, to say that the back straight is 5 corners. But yeah, they're going to try and do a DRS zone along there, but this isn't the Valencia street circuit where there's a couple kinks and you can kind of get away with calling it a straight. No, this is full weaving. There's no way you're going to be able to go side by side without, really risking yourself. And again, as you're saying, if it's Mercedes, why would you risk yourself? Why would you, be prepared to DNF in this race? On a more technical note, by the way, just slightly switch the subject, Josh, is to do with the barriers, the safer barriers that we've got in for this circuit. Now, safer technology is nothing new to motorsport. We've had it in IndyCar for years. It's what guards around the edge of the ovals to ensure that those IndyCars don't smash themselves to bits, as it were, going into the barrier at the ovals. But it's rare, and I don't think we've ever seen it on a Formula One track. And I think that just shows you how dangerous everyone here thinks these walls are going to be. Because if you're installing an entirely new and relatively untested barrier for a Formula One car, very well tested in IndyCar, don't get me wrong, but untested for a Formula One car, that says to me that they're not confident that people aren't just going to fly off into these barriers at any given moment. And as you mentioned, Formula 2, I am going to put my hands down and say there is a bet on this table. Maybe £5. Maybe I'll raise it higher with you, Josh and Ross, which is there will be a red flag in the F2 race, and it will be because somebody smashed into the barrier and destroyed it at a various point.
Yes. Well, sorry, Josh, can I just quickly say something? Well, we'll talk about F2 in a minute, actually, just before we wrap up. But just a slight correction, they did have safer barriers at Zandvoort, but I don't think it's not on this scale. They only had them on the bank corners. The safe barriers are basically the entire way around the circuit. So yeah, interesting what you say. And another thing as well with the pit stops, it's a very good point, because all it takes is one mistimed pit stop and you're stuck in traffic and your race is over. So that's another thing teams are going to have to think about round there as well. Sorry, Josh, do please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, as you said, the overtaking, it will be almost impossible. Because with a circuit so fast and with 2 drivers that are so much faster than the rest. I mean, we saw in Qatar, that wasn't a particularly fast circuit, yet it seemed that they were just, Verstappen and Hamilton were just gone. They literally just disappeared half a track ahead of everyone else. So you're going to have traffic, you're going to have the Haas cars, I hate to say it, the Williams cars, they're going to be probably quite vital in the championship fight, because if Hamilton or Verstappen can get past them before these snaky straights, as I'll call them, and Hamilton or Verstappen get stuck behind them, you could gain 2.5 seconds by the time that they can get past them again. You've got things like that to think about as well. Also, as I said, because it's at night, it will be cooler, so the brakes will be cooler, so the air will be cooler, which means on the long straights, the brakes will cool down so much that potentially there'll be trouble braking into the heavy corners. So that's something they've got to think about. I'm basing it on Singapore here, where they had a lot of brake trouble with Singapore. I know it's completely different, but it's more or less the same.
I think Singapore's a very, accelerate, brake type circuit, especially around the back. This, I think, would be more akin to something like Azerbaijan.
It's something like 78% full throttle or something was a stat I saw earlier, is an estimation, which is ludicrous.
Also, the ludicrousy of calling this a street track, by the way, but carry on.
Yeah.
But also, Saudi Arabia, if I remember rightly, has a lot of dew at night. And obviously, I've seen, the Cricket World Cup that's just happened out there and all that sort of thing. There was the grass became soaking wet. Now, I don't know what the ground becomes at night, but I can guess there'd be a dew factor to think about there as well in the air, and with the cars as well, because of the moisture in the air, the curbs get slippery the further on the race gets because of the moisture. That's something you've got to think about. Will what will happen with will there be something to think about with dew? Never thought you'd ever have to talk about Formula One and dew, but this could be one of them where you have a very hot day and a very cold night. The dew is just going to be horrendous.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's another thing to think about as well. Is it's not going to be cold because it's the middle of a desert, but the night is definitely going to be cooler. And actually, with the dew as well, if that is a factor, that's going to make it even colder. And one thing a lot of people don't consider is actually that means the engine have more power, because when it's colder, the air is denser, so there's more air going into the engine, so you get more bang out the engine. There's so many things to think about. So actually, in that regard, when it's rained, they're actually faster when it rains. But
is this then an advantage then to the Mercedes with their new engine and their new system? Then, if you're going to have very thick air, as it were, would that be better for the car?
Or could Mercedes have too much power?
That's a statement.
Because
now it's throttle maps. This is the most technical F1 show we've had in a long time, everyone.
Because, as Ross said, if they're getting more power out of an already very fast engine, there is a time when you could have too much power for the circuit, where you're going too fast to drive the circuit fast.
Oh, okay.
And you're always.
I'll slightly argue against that and go, I think Hamilton and Verstappen have enough ability to check themselves. Saying that, though, one thing I do want to make is altitude. The Brazilian Grand Prix is one of the highest Grand Prix of the year. It's right on top of sort of the mountain top, as it were. And the Mercedes engines performed very well in those low altitude conditions. This is sea level. We are right next to the Dead Sea. This is very thick air. In the evening, as you mentioned, this is completely the opposite air density to what they were having in Brazil, and they're going to be using their Brazilian engine. So while I don't deny the Brazilian engine will be good, what I want to see is, does it perform well in basically a different in a different environment where they're going to be able to get a lot more air to their engine? Because maybe that was the other thing, which is maybe the Mercedes engine isn't that powerful. Maybe it is just a case of Red Bull's engine performing quite poorly in the height of the Brazilian circuit, basically.
And then you've also got to think about the wind, because you said you were right on the Dead Sea. There's going to be a pretty stiff sea breeze, I would expect, being blown in. And as I've said, I go back to Bahrain. We've seen the havoc Bahrain causes when the wind blows. You're going to get sand being blown onto the track. But not just that. If you're turning into a corner at 160 mile an hour, suddenly there's a gust of 25, 30 mile an hour wind affecting your aerodynamics, you're going to be all over the place.
Absolutely. And one thing I'm just quickly Googling as well, actually, support races are going to come into it. At Brazil, the support race we had was all Porsches, and they run on Michelin rubber. And obviously Formula One cars run on Pirelli rubber. So the way the track evolved was very unique in the fact, there was no other Pirelli rubber being laid down. And, this is a phenomenon that's very common in karting, especially, is when you have a different rubber compound to the one that's been laid down before, often the tyres behave very, very differently. I remember back 2017 World Championship at Paul Fletcher's International, the junior category used Vegas and the seniors used Dunlops or something. I can't remember. I won't get into the details. Essentially, they mixed up the qualifying. So instead of it being, here's one load of qualifying and then the other load of qualifying, they did the juniors, seniors, juniors, seniors. And essentially, apologies. It was one load and the other load, but it should have been juniors, seniors, juniors, seniors. And what that meant was for the carts that in the juniors that went out after, in the seniors that went out after the juniors, because the juniors used a different rubber. Get there, it's a long time ago. I'm trying to remember, but essentially, because the juniors went out first and had a different rubber compound, a different tire compound, a different make of rubber. When the seniors went out, the first lot of seniors that went out, their tyres just reacted so much better to the track surface. So actually, all of the pole sitters, all the fast guys in qualifying were the ones in the first group. So, and that's something to think about. Again, something that came in at Qatar as well. The reason why Qatar was a real struggle for a lot of the teams is because there was no support race in that weekend. It was just Formula One on a very dusty circuit they'd never been to before. So the track was evolving very, very quickly between the sessions for the F1 cars, but not as quickly as they'd have liked. And because there was no extra Pirelli rubber being put down, come the race, it probably wasn't at maximum evolution. You know, you didn't have that ulterior factor. Coming in here, I don't think we have Porsche Supercup. We're just going to check it now, actually, but we do have Formula 2, and obviously they do run on Pirelli rubber. It's slightly different compound, but it's still a Pirelli manufacturer. So, you know, they're going to be racing on rubber they're familiar with, and the circuit is going to be very rubbered up. So although it'll be dusty, and although it'll be cold and wet and moisty or whatever it is, as Josh said, you know, the actual track itself will still have that Pirelli grip down. And that's a very different scenario to what we've been seeing from the last two races, you know, especially Brazil, you know, where Mercedes ran so well, as Connor said, you know, in the high altitude with Michelin rubber on the track. So now we're coming into basically sea level with Pirelli rubber down on the track, exclusively Pirelli rubber. What's that going to mean for Mercedes? You know, will the Red Bull and Honda combination actually work better with that? You know, we know that the Red Bull, it's sometimes it's very, very quick. Sometimes it's almost unbeatable on, especially on the tyres as well. Sometimes they run very, very well, and sometimes they don't. So it's interesting to see how that's all going to work out. So I suppose we just have to wait, essentially. But that actually leads me on very, very nicely to our next topic, where we're just going to briefly talk about a bit of Formula 2. You know, they're getting into their final little section of the season, so why not? We've got 2 rounds left in the Formula 2 Championship, 6 races, if that means if you're a mathematician. And well, we've basically got a championship fight on our hands of the top 2 Alpine rookies, one of whom is the Alfa Romeo driver next year. The other one's the Alpine reserve. We've got Guan Yu Zhou and Oscar Piastri. And well, the question that, you know, Connor was asking kind of pre-race, and I'll let Connor answer it himself because he came up with it, is, you know, what does Guan Yu Zhou do? Because this is his 3rd season in the championship. He's now got himself a race at Alfa Romeo next year, along with bringing along a vast sum of money. Surely now he's going to be thinking, I actually kind of need to win this. Is he going to sort himself out? Is he going to have a new fresh boost of motivation? Or is it, you know, going to be Piastri's to lose at this point?
I mean, it's the Caleb Eilert situation last year with Mick Schumacher, in which one who had his future secured did very well at the end, and the one who didn't have his future secured struggled a little bit, actually. But the one thing I want to say is, I'm not sure whether you will put in the major effort for these final couple rounds, because if he's got his race seat confirmed, and I had a look earlier, and I think he needs only like a 5th place in the championship to secure his super license points, basically. Zhou doesn't really need to push in these last couple rounds. It is very much Piastri's to lose. There's a good, I think it's 36 point difference between the two, 50, 60, 70. Yeah, that works, yes. There's 36 point difference between the two. So there's a notable gap. But Zhou isn't that far in front of the guys behind. He's only, 7 in front of Robert Schwartzman. And he himself is only another sort of 6 in front of Dan Ticktor. And then Theo Pourchaire behind that. So with 2 rounds to go and 3 races effectively, there's still plenty to play for. But I would be curious whether the Chinese driver sort of bothers, as it were, to end the season on a high note. Because why would you? You've got your future secured. I don't think he'd like completely collapse in the same way we saw, Stefano Coletti back in 2014 just lose the championship dramatically. But yeah, I don't think. I think this is Piastri very much to lose, because I don't see Zhou pushing, and it's just a case of whether Schwartzman and Ticktum can catch him before the end of the season, which probably not. It's the answer.
However, to counter that, this is one of the most the F2 is coming in now. This is one of the most volatile seasons of Formula 2 that we have ever had. It's without doubt the strongest grid we've seen in the Formula 2 era. And we've got 3 races in a weekend this year. It's going back to 2 next year, thank goodness me, because 3 races has been terrible. But what it means is that, the weekend is anybody's guess when they have. Because if you destroy the car in race 1, and, we're going to Jeddah, that's a possibility. The walls are very close. It's very fast. Given F2's track record this year of having a few big accidents per weekend, and I think it's at least 1 safety car per race or something ridiculous. If you destroy your car in race 1, you're done for the weekend. Because, it's going to be difficult to repair in time. It's gotten to the point this season where teams, that the teams up the front, you're thinking Renault, you're thinking ART, Prema, there you go, that's the one, Prema, ART. They're not bringing spare parts. They're bringing just fully constructed bits of the car with them, just spare bits of car in case the car gets towed. So that they don't have to spend time repairing it. They can just bolt it on and go if they need to. For the teams lower down the grid, the teams that left money, that's a bit of an issue. And we've seen championships move in this way now. Josh, as you were saying earlier, going to be dusty, going to be very, very difficult to drive on. These F2 cars, they are a handful to drive. Several drivers have actually said they're more difficult to drive than the F1 cars because of how physical it is. We're going to be seeing some accidents. Do you reckon we could be seeing a dramatic change in the championship this weekend?
Yeah, I think again, this could be as vital a race in the Formula 2 championship as it will be in the Formula 1. And it wouldn't surprise me if, it's decided in the last race. It's going to be one of those championships, I think, where the conditions, the track, everything comes together for one driver, and it becomes an absolute nightmare for another driver.